So I'd like to start looking at some of the assignments that got turned in, the liquefy assignment and the knockout as well. So this is Kennedy's, and this is pretty remarkably well done. Congratulations. This is really hard to do. As most of you guys found, when you actually try to do the head rotation, it distorts horribly. And Kennedy actually manages to do this. Don't ask me how. She's evil, I know. No, I'm just, she actually managed to do the entire rotation using only liquefy. Most of the time, the easy solution to it is to do a copy and paste, which we'll look at a little bit later. But she actually manages to get this thing, and look at how little distortion. There's really no distortion in it, which is really, really, yeah, believe me, I know I've done this thing a gazillion times. This is really, really difficult to do. So this is her before and after. And if I were to have any criticism at all, when I actually look at the legs here, and a lot of you guys did the same sort of thing, you're actually only pushing in from the outside, and that's not really the way legs work. It actually, the better method, it's much, much more difficult to do, it takes more time, is to actually draw the legs in from both sides so that they actually keep their shape. The thigh down here, I mean, not the thigh, the ankle down here gets just a little touch wonky as far as that goes, but it still looks really, really, really pretty flawless, I've got to say. So anyway, I just wanted to sort of point that one out. And it wasn't all about, again, a lot of people will say, well, how far do you take this? You know, it's not necessarily about that as much as it's about understanding, you know, form and shape and proportion, that kind of stuff. The only thing I will say, and it's a couple of you did it, a couple of you didn't do, or a lot of you didn't do it actually here, is you need to be careful when you're actually contracting the stomach in, because what the tendency is for it to actually pull her boobs down as well, which does not really help aid in this whole sort of like process that we're trying to go for. If I had to guess, the fact that this girl's boobs do not move at all, and Kennedy's liquefy part right here, my guess is that she's actually frozen this whole top area before she actually went after that part. Would that be fair to say? Yeah. And it works great. Again, it's this whole idea of having the things that you can move, movable, the things that you don't want to move, freezing, and really just sort of taking your time and working your way slowly through that. So I just wanted to point that one out. Take a look at Naomi's really quickly here. This was exactly what I was talking about in terms of the head distortion here. The thing about this is, though, it's actually a good move to, even though this gets really distorted, it's a very smart move to get to this point, to begin to actually work with it at this stage of the game. I'm going to show you really quickly how I would go about fixing this. So she only has a single liquefy state, which is fine. You can do it all in one state. It doesn't have to be multiple states. You don't have to do it in that sense. But what I'm really looking to do is, I'm not so concerned about her face and the top of her head. I'm looking to build her shoulders and a place to actually put her face on top of. So I'm going to go to the move to the left tool. I'm going to keep my density pretty tight on this one because I want to move the entire head. And then I'm simply going to take this and bring it over, maybe bring that part over a little bit more. Again, I've still got a lot of distortion in the face. That's not the part that I'm so concerned about. It's really just having something that I can re-anchor that goes down into her neck. Her neck goes down into this part of her body, this lower part down in here. I'm going to do this without the mesh on, even though a lot of times I've told you before, I do a lot of work with the mesh. You can see right here, by looking at the mesh on her shoulder, right in this area right here, you can see how scrambled that whole thing is. Again, little things like that, the mesh helps point this out. So we could come in and we could actually fix that part because it's just not needed. Again, I'll push it in just a little bit more to give it a little bit more shape. I'm going to turn the mesh off though really quickly because sometimes it actually gets a little confusing about what's going on here. So I'm going to bring her head down in here a little bit and this part in just a little bit. So I'm feeling pretty good about this. I'm going to go ahead and say okay to that. I'm going to go back to my original layer here, hit the L key to get the lasso tool, and I'm simply going to do a big selection. This is another problem you guys ran into, some of you ran into, is when you were making the selections to actually do this part. Actually, I'm not doing it on the top layer, I'm doing it on this layer right here. When you're doing it on this part, a lot of people selected things that were just like her face, or you need to select a really big area so that you've got room to actually then move what you need into place and to reconnect things. So there were people who would select just the face, but then it became impossible to actually then put the face on the neck that was already distorted. Anyway, it was just a mess. So over select is what I'm really trying to say. Command J to actually get to make a copy of this, take it all the way to the top. Turn this guy back on. So this is what's underneath right now. So I'm going to turn this guy on. I'm going to drop the opacity down on this quite a bit. So then I'm going to, again, this is the cut and paste version of this. Command T to bring up the transform dialog box. And then usually what I try to do is line up the eyes. So I'm just going to bring the eyes in so that they're about the same. And that's relatively close. And go ahead and say OK to that. Bring my opacity all the way back up. Then I'm going to put a black layer mask on this. Simply hold down the Option key and add a black layer mask. Hit the B key to get a brush, a little bit larger brush. In this case, about a 50% hardness. Again, this is that sort of, we're trying our best not to blend textures in, but we can't have really hard lines. So I can't have a completely soft brush or a completely hard brush. I'm going to just go somewhere in the middle. And then I'm just going to start to bring in the face, the new face that's actually on here, and see if I can't get this to actually look better. And that part is pretty good right here. This shoulder and this part in here is not really great, and this part right here. So I'm going to hit the X key to bring that part back. And then I would probably go in, again, depending on what, at this stage of the game, if I felt like this was good enough, hang on one second, I got to bring that more down into that. So if I like the way that this is actually beginning to look, but there's still a little bit, a few imperfections about it or whatever at this stage of the game, like the collar part on here, let me see if I can get that to build back in again. Anyway, certain things like that. At this stage of the game, even though we've gone through our sort of steps that we normally do, liquify would be the final step in this, I'll go ahead and do a merge stamp version of this. So to do merge stamp version, Command Option Shift and the letter E. I've got a brand new place to start from right now. And so with this, I can then come into my layer, go ahead and turn this into a smart object, and I can start liquifying again. So I would simply come back into liquify. I think there's a repeating pattern in the hair right here, which is pretty obvious. So I can push this stuff in to actually reconnect that. I mean, you can do all sorts of things. You could also go back and start to do a split frequency at this stage of the game. You can do healing brush at this stage, clone stamp tool at this stage of the game. All of those things you can sort of do as a whole start over again. So this is just in that quick moment, a little bit of time that it took us to do that. We're going to go from here to here. So to show you what I was talking about earlier about the contracted stomach issue, take a look at Mitchell's really quick. And this is exactly what happened to his. So if we take a look here, you'll see that the contraction of the stomach actually, the stomach contracts. I mean, he does that part really pretty well, but it starts to pull her chest down, making it lower, heavier, weightier, whatever. So it sort of satisfies one issue, but creates another one. So this, and we'll see if this actually ends up working this way. I've never seen this happen, and but yours isn't the only file. So if you take a look at this, you'll see that there is The transparency in the top layer I understand, but there's this transparency in the liquefy layer. It's bizarre. And then watch this. I'm going to turn, do you guys see the transparency in this liquefy layer right here? It's a smart object. It can't have transparency in it. I mean, the file itself, if I open up the layer itself, this could have transparency in it, and then that would make sense to have it in this. But this doesn't make any sense. Now watch what happens. I'm going to turn liquefy off, and it shows up, and then I'm going to turn liquefy back on, and it goes away, but this is the weirdest. If I open up the liquefy, look at this. This is a corrupted file. This shouldn't be, look at this. I've never seen this, not ever. So we need to check to make sure. I want to see if somehow the file got corrupted when it went to the server, whatever. Believe me, so bizarre. And it wasn't the only one. So check this. And Jamila's, the same thing ends up happening. Look at this. I've got this weird hunk of transparency that's sitting right on the very top of her head, and it shouldn't be there. And if I turn the smart filter off, it comes back in. But this is, it's bizarre to me. I have no idea why this is happening, and I've looked and I can't find it. So at any rate, that's just so that you guys know basically what was going on here. And then finally, I want to show you Nolan's really quick. So here, Nolan actually got that part right. Sort of the whole copy paste, that kind of stuff. But this was what I was talking about when I said I think the selection was too small. If we take a look just basically at the head, I'm going to turn off the layer mask. This is the face that he actually uses, and you can see you're just not giving yourself enough room around there to really blend her back in. And you can go back and do it again. It's not like it's not like you didn't burn anything in, you didn't bake anything in. None of that was wrong. But it's just in my own experience. If I'm like only doing somebody's head, I will usually do the whole upper half of their body as a selection, just in case. Because there's nothing worse than working on something for like a half hour and then realizing, oh my God, I just needed a little bit more and I would have been fine. But instead, you got to start all over again. So I just want to throw that out. And then instead of going through the knockout for 8.3, I want to do that with everybody here in class. So if everybody can find this, we're going to actually take it from the top. A lot of you did this very well. It's always amazing. No, starting at the sign-in sheet. It's always amazing to me when you guys first started this class, where you were at and where you're at now. It's just night and day. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how you guys are feeling about this, but I am always amazed to see where you're at right now. The things that we started in the very beginning that seemed so challenging are just like so simple and easy for you guys to deal with right now. And I'm hoping that that's the process that continues on through the rest of the remainder of this course. But I just want to go over the knockout part one more time. We're going to take it as a complete thing just so that we can trick it out in all its little final episodes. It's the last time we're actually going to do this. Like I said, but I was impressed by the majority of you and the way you did it. I want to show you, I just want to go through this with you again. We're going to do this really fast. So it's in our week 8, I think. I hope. Yep, so it's the green screen test one. If you can open that one up, it's the girl holding the red fur. And we'll just take this off in the beginning. It's not a smart object. I'm not going to use it as a smart object simply because I need to remove the spill of it and everything else. But I'm going to start by simply making a copy of the background layer. So Command J makes a copy of it. And then I am going to run, does everybody in here finally have a 0 selective color action? Does anyone not have one of those? All right, so then I'm simply going to run that action. I end up with a black screen. I'm going to change my drop-down menu in my selective color at the very top from reds down to greens, and drag the black slider all the way from the right side to the left side to basically fill, again, I'm trying to fill the green with white ink. I'm going to zoom into her hair, and the thing about is it's the hair and the other things in here, the hair, the bits of the boa, all that kind of stuff. Those are the things that make me really nervous in terms of how aggressive you are using hue saturation, because now I'm going to go to the hue saturation layer that is underneath this. I'm going to click on the hue saturation layer. I'm going to click on the targeting adjustment tool. Again, it's the hand that has the arrows that go to side to side. When I click on this, even though this thing looks gray to you, actually it's the thing that's making it gray is the selective color that's on top. If you turn that off, Photoshop knows that this thing is green. And so when I click on it, it's actually going to target the green, and then when I crank it up, it makes it much brighter, and that's the effect that I'm looking for. But you can also already see what this does to her hair. It absolutely destroys the hair. It's far, far, far too aggressive. So I'm going to zero this back out again. I'm going to turn on my selective color again, and again, Photoshop, I'm still working on my hue saturation layer. Photoshop still knows that this is green. So when I click on it, if I go back even up to my master, when I click on it, you can see it already picks greens, it sets the targeting level right here, and we're good to go on this. So as you start to click and drag, I'm dragging to the right to increase the saturation of this. You'll start to see in the hair, this is one of the problems and the things that I look for. At a certain point, some of this hair that's still dark right now is actually going to flip, and it'll actually go lighter than the background. You can see it's beginning to happen on the very top of her head. If I continue this process, though, you'll actually see when it starts to sort of begin to fall apart. And at this stage of the game, there's hairs in here that are actually lighter than the background. And it's pretty much torn up, all the fine sort of feathery hair parts that are in here. You can see the same thing is happening on this side over here. So I'm going to back my saturation off just a little bit. I need to make sure that I've got all of that good hair that's pretty much still in there. If you want the same saturation move that I have on mine, it's around 40. However, I need everybody to look at my screen really quickly. The order of this matters. The order of having the hue saturation underneath the selective color matters, because the selective color in and of itself removes all the color of the image. So watch what happens. I'm going to drag my hue saturation on top, and if I put it up on top, you'll see that nothing now matters in terms of changing the saturation. I can start moving it all over the place. Nothing changes because the selective color has already removed all of the color, so there is nothing to saturate or not saturate. Does that make sense to everybody? So the order matters. The hue saturation has always got to be under the selective color. So let me go back into here and change my layer order. So again, if you want the sort of same exact coloring that I had on mine, yeah, I ended up with the saturation in the low 40s in the greens. So that's where I'm going to actually start. And at this stage of the game, all I need to do is copy one of my red, green, or blue channels. Some people will actually load the luminosity of the RGB. I don't, because if you take a look at the RGB right now, if you take a look at your RGB channel, the composite, you'll actually see that it's darker than the red channel. If you go to the red channel that's underneath it, that background's actually lighter. That's a better option for me. Again, I want contrast here. I want the lightest background that I can get and the darkest figure that I can get. And the RGB, the individual red, green, and blues, they are all identical because this is a black and white image. But the luminosity of the RGB composite is darker. Do not ask me why. That should not happen, but it does. So anyway, I'm going to simply select the red channel, drag it down to the little icon at the bottom of the channel to make a copy of it. I'm going to double click on it and call it Knockout. And say OK, and then I'm going to put down points. Again, color sampler points. I'm going to click on the color sampler tool, the eyedropper tool. It's the third one down, the color sampler tool. And there actually is, if you take a look down on her body, you can see that there is a necklace that's on her chest that's actually, the reason it's showing up is because it's actually green. I'm not going to select that. I can get that with a paintbrush too easy. But if you come down and you actually look at, like for instance, her hip on the right-hand side, sort of her right hip, you can see that there's there is tone in there. Now, I'm getting weird number readings. So I'm looking at my info palette and I'm getting these weird readings. And the reason I'm getting weird readings is because I still have my adjustment layer selected. You actually need to come down and select the layer, the copy that we're actually working on. You need to select that in order to get your the readout that we're looking for. And I'm going to click again on my knockout. And then if I hover around this area, there's a little bit of something in here. Take a look, oh, right down here on her knees. You can actually see there's actually tone down on her knees. So I'm going to go ahead and drop one color sampler point there and then another color sampler point just out onto my background. In my case right now, I've got 3 color sampler points. I have no idea where the first one is, and I don't trust it anyway. So I'm going to clear all. So again, up at the very top, clear all. You'll also notice that my options is saying point sample. When I ran into the whole insane smart object perversion file, whatever mess was, I reset all of my preferences and I've regretted it ever since. So anyway, I'm changing my point sample back to a 3x3. I am going to hit clear all to get rid of those points, and then I'm going to drop 2 more points down. So 1 at her knee, 1 on the background. Then over to my info palette, click on the eyedroppers to change the readouts from K, which is the black of CMYK, to RGB. And I'm going to do it for both. And then I'm actually going to run levels on this. Command L to bring up the levels dialog box. And I will start with my black point and start to drag it forward. I'm looking at my number 1 till I get close to 0, but not quite to 0. Then go to my arrow keys and tap it in. So now I've got my that area of her knee that had some tone in it has now gone to solid black. And then I'm going to grab my white point slider and pull it way back. And again, I'm watching my after readout of my point number 2. I get close to 250 and go to my arrow keys and tap that in to get to 255. Before I say OK to this, I'm going to go back up to the hair and revisit the hair. I just want to make sure that I'm not doing too much damage to this, because this is where it really shows up, is all of this subtlety part in here. So I am going to use the preview check mark on my levels control, and I'm going to turn it on and off. And I want to just make sure that I'm not doing too much damage in here and that I'm OK with this. And that part feels good to me. I'm going to zip back out, because this is another problem some of you guys ran into. Some of you tried to actually use levels to get the floor. And it's simply, it ends up being far too aggressive to grab the floor. If we were going to try to get the floor, I'm going to put down another color sampler point down here, if it'll let me. I'm going to put another color sampler point down here and actually get it to be RGB. So I've got a third sampler point on the floor. And you can see it's at a 184 right now. If I get this thing to go to 255, look what happens to the rest of my image. So let me get it all the way up there first. Back it off to 252, 255, and then look what happens to this image. Look at how blocky, it's like this whole thing is like so cut out, but look what happens to her hair. It just trashes it. And so you realize is that this levels trick is really good to a certain stage of the game, but you need to know when to stop and then use your other tools. And our other tools are going to be the pen tool and the overlay brush. So I'm going to go back where I was before. I'm going to ignore that number 3. I'm just going to work off my number 2. And again, go to my arrow keys. And everybody's looking pretty good here, so I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. So I can look over here and I can see that there's contamination in my in this other side of here, up by her face right here. I've still got contamination in here. I'm going to go ahead and throw down another color sampler point right there, and I'm going to run levels again because it's really subtle, but there's enough there that I don't want to try to paint it out. You can see I've got a 253 that's actually on it, so Command L to bring up levels again, and then I'm simply going to use my arrow keys to actually get me to 255, and that cleans out the rest of that background without really affecting the hair too much, and I'm feeling pretty good about this. So I'm going to double click on the hand. At this stage of the game, I would save my work up to the menu, to File, down to Save As. And we're going to save this on my computer. Please don't show that to me again. How many of you guys are saving all of your work in the cloud? I think that's smart that you're not. Say what?
In the Adobe cloud?
Yeah.
No, I save it to the laptop. Sometimes I'll save it to both, but
both is fine. Both is actually would probably be the smartest way, because then you've got a local copy, but you've also got a geographically different copy. So at any rate, this is a good beginning to this part right here. If you scroll up to the top of your history palette, you should see that you have a history state that's got a time stamp on it. That's one of the reasons that we have our history set up the way we have our history set up. Those are really important things to actually, if we do get into trouble, place that we can actually come back to and return to. So we now need to actually work on where the coat actually meets the floor. So the B key to get a brush. I'm going to make this a 50% hard brush. Again, I'm going to use overlay to try to restrict where I actually do this work. And I've also got, I can see contamination right above the coat on the background wall here. I'm going to try levels one more time. I want to clean this out. I could do it with a brush, but if I can get this cleaned out without destroying the hair, it's just a much faster way of doing it. So I'm going to add one more color sampler point right in this area that's just above the coat. I'm going to look for sort of the darkest area that I can. And again, I've got now a color sampler point number 5, change it to RGB, Command L to bring up the levels dialog box, swipe across the white part, and start to tap that in, and say OK. Yeah, I'm feeling a little bit better about that. So at any rate, B key to get a brush, a 50% hardness brush. Make it a little bit larger. Change the blending mode from normal to overlay. Hit the D key to default your colors to black and white. If white is your background color, hit the X key to make it your foreground color. And again, I'm simply going to start to swipe underneath where the coat is actually hitting the floor to clean that part out. Now we can try and actually hit this around the shoes, and it does a pretty good job. You'll see that there's actually areas in here that don't get completely cleaned out. If you hit it with a brush the second time, you can actually get it to eat away, and the third time will take care of it. You can try the same thing on the floor that's actually underneath her shoe. It actually does a pretty good job. But what most people will do in this case is actually use the pen tool. So I'm going to do that for the other shoe. I'm going to hit the P key and simply surround or outline her. Hang on, let me add my rubber band. And once you get up on the background, you're fine here. I'm going to load this as a selection now. Command click to load it. I'm also just going to double click on it and leave it called path 1 so I don't have to redo that part again. And now I've got two options. One is I can actually see that there is part of the shoe that actually is inside my selection now that should be darker. So again, I'm going back to my B key to get the overlay brush. I don't need to worry about the size of my overlay brush right now because the selection is going to restrict it. The only place that I can paint now is inside those marching ants. I'm going to hit the X key to get black as my foreground color, and then simply tap once, and that goes ahead and fills in that area that I was having an issue with. Now though, I want to actually shift to the background, and then to do that I need to invert the selection. The selection will only allow me now to paint inside on her shoes. I want to paint on the background, so up to the select menu, down to inverse, and now everything else is selected. And again, I'm changing back to white as my foreground color, and I can just start to paint this area that's around her feet. Be careful that you don't hit the other shoe, because the other shoe is not being protected right now. But all I was trying to do was to get that outline, and everything that I need is now done. I'm going to hit Command D to deselect. I'm going to zoom back out a little bit. I don't need to use an overlay brush at all anymore. Take that back. I've still got noise and contamination that's in this whole area just above the coat on the background. So I'm going to make my cursor much larger here. It's still an overlay. White is still my foreground color, and I'm simply going to clean out all of that garbage that's in the mask. And that should be pretty good. And then finally, I'm going to change my brush back to a normal brush. I'm going to change its edge to a completely hard brush. This way I don't need to worry about overspraying anything, and then I can simply finish getting rid of all of that part right there. I'm going to zip back out. It's really simple, simply to get rid of this stuff on the sides. And that part actually looks pretty good to me. And then we're going to find out how well, oh, actually remember the necklace that was actually in the middle. You can actually still see highlights from it. I can pick them up right here. So again, with hit the X key to get black as my foreground color and simply tap that. This is looking pretty good. Let's find out how well we did. So I'm going to hover over the thumbnail for knockout, hold down the Command key and click once. It loads it as a selection. Go back up to my layers palette right here, and I'm actually going to add it to my layer. So I'm going to simply click on it. It does add it. I'm going to get rid of my hue, saturation, and selective color layers. They've done all their work. I don't need to use those anymore. I'm going to select my background layer right now, because the new background needs to go between my background and the knockout layer that I'm actually working on. So I've got my background selected. I'm going to add a solid color to this, and we'll make it white. So again, 255. Oops. Tab key 255, tab 255, say OK. And that did not fill. Let's try that again. Solid color. Okay, and then invert the layer mask. So I've just selected the layer mask, Command I inverts it. So I do have spill on her face, but I do have really good hair in here. I've got good detail in here. I've also got spill that's running down the side of the boa. A lot of you guys missed that. This part that's between her legs, you missed that as well. Looking at this, it does not look like this image needs to be choked until I get down to here, to this hand right here. That actually is screaming to be choked, so we are going to choke this really quick. Over to my history palette. All these readout numbers, you can see they keep pushing my info palette down deeper and deeper, which makes it crowds my history and my channels as well. All the work that I needed for these readouts, I've got. I don't need these things anymore. So I'm going to go back to my color sampler tool, hit clear all. It collapses my info palette back up, and now I can actually do some work using my history palette. The first thing I'm going to do is actually do a history snapshot of where I'm at right now and call this pre-choke. And say OK. And then I'm going to go ahead and choke this mask. So working on the layer mask that we've got, up to the filter menu, down to blur, down to Gaussian blur. It's going to open up, and what I'm really trying to do is, again, I'm trying to bring in shades of gray as we transition in this mask from the white area of the mask to the black area of the mask. I'm trying to add middle tones of gray in there so that I can push the mask, either make it wider and more open, which would be spreading it, or tighten it up, which would be choking it. I'm going to hit this a little bit harder. I'm going to see what it looks like for 2 pixels. And I feel like 2 pixels is probably going to work for me on this. I'm going to say OK to that. Then I'm going to hit Command L to bring up the levels dialog box. Again, I'm running levels on my mask right here. And what it's doing is taking those levels of gray as this transitions from the white part of the mask to the black part. There's a series of grays in here, and I can use this levels to actually push those grays in one direction or the other. So as I grab the black point and start to drag it to the white point, you can see that it's actually choking this mask now, and it's getting rid of that little edge area that I need. If you feel like this edge is too soft now, you can actually sharpen it up by essentially grabbing your white slider and pulling it towards the middle as well. What you'll notice is it ends up sharpening things. Again, we're building contrast along that edge. So it becomes this iteration between using the black point slider and the white point slider. Again, you can use your preview box here to check your work to see and make sure that everything is doing what you want it to do. In my case, this is doing exactly what I want it to do, so I'm going to go ahead and say OK to that. However, if we now look at what's happened in this post-choke state, look at what's happened to her hair. It's absolutely destroyed her hair. So in this, did I make, I haven't, I've got a pre-choke state of this, so now I need to do a post-choke state. So before you do anything else, history snapshot, post-choke, and say OK to that. Now at this stage of the game, I am going to go back and undo all of the damage that I've done. So in my history palette, I'm simply going to go back 2 steps. I'm going to go back before I did the blur, before I did the choke part. And so I'm going to click on when I deleted all those color samplers. But even though I've gone back in history and this has brought back all the problem that I had in that hand, you'll see right here, I can use the history state of what it looked like when this had been choked. So let me zoom out just a little bit. To do that, scroll to the top of your history palette. Do not select the post-choke state. If you click on this, you get back the choke on everything. That's not what we want to do. We want to use this really discreetly. So I am going to simply click on the just to the left of the icon where it says post-choke. That says that when I now use my history brush, it will actually create the image as it looked when the post-choke actually had happened. So with that actually selected, I'm going to then select my history brush, not the art history brush. Check to make sure that in this case you don't really need to worry about the edge part of it because history is controlling where it actually is applied and where it isn't applied. I am going to leave it as a normal blending mode. I'm going to leave also 100% opacity, 100% flow. And in this case, you can be pretty heavy-handed about it. I'm just dragging it across all of this part where I want to get rid of that choke. If you feel like you've got a little bit of green that you need to choke anywhere on, like there's a small little edge right here on the side of her sleeve, you can actually choke that part down as well. You can be really you can discriminate with this. But you'll notice I don't have any of the problem with her hair. So to fix her hair, I'm actually going to select the image, the pixel content of her hair right now. Again, still with the B key. Make sure it is a completely soft brush now. Again, I want to spray in the spill correction. I'm going to change my blending mode from normal down to color, because what that'll do is it will keep the luminosity of the hair. So the highlights and the shadows in the hair remain. All I'm doing is changing the color of them. I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller. I'm going to sample some hair. So I'm going to just hover over the area that's right on her forehead, hold down the Option key to get the color sampler tool. Click once and you'll see when I click, it gives me this heads-up display showing me the color that I've picked. If you click on this and you hold it, you can actually move your cursor around. So if you know that you wanted something that was a little bit darker, you can actually go finding it. So I feel like, oh yeah, that's a little bit darker. I'm going to go with that color. And then simply let go, and you're good to go. And then we can simply paint out the spill that's on the side of her face. Now, at this stage of the game, I would go to a much harder brush because I really want to control where this actually happens. I'm going to make this brush much smaller. and sample the boa color here so that I can come in here and get all of this part right here to get rid of that. I've got a little bit on the edge of her face right here that really should have been choked. I can still do that. Go back to your layer mask, because again, what we're changing is the layer mask. So history is not going to make that move for you. So you need to make sure that you have the layer mask selected and go back to the history brush and make it smaller. And then I can run it simply down here, and it takes care of the choke on the side of her face. And if I had it on the other side, there's probably a little bit right there on the other side, I can also knock that out. And then I simply go and continue this. B key to get back to my color. Go back to the pixel layer to actually do it. Change the blending mode back to color. A little bit larger brush. Again, sample some color of her hair in here and start to remove the rest of the spill. And there you go. Are there questions about any of this? You can close that up. We do not need to save that. So did anybody, again, I'm just going to make a blanket announcement right now. Every class that we have from now until the end of the semester, we're going to look at any sort of work in progress that you've got for your final project. Does anybody have anything to look at today here? No, it's fine. If you've got something to look at, I put an announcement in for a Zoom room. It's just going to be easier for us to look at it on the screen up in here. So if you've got something to look at, will you join that meeting? I'm going to open the meeting right now. Hang on one second. I'm not going to record this meeting because I've got a low battery on this, and I want to make sure I have enough battery to get through the rest of the class. So hang on one second.